The marble floor of the Langston estate gleamed under the chandelier's soft golden rain, but the house felt colder than ever. For years, ever since Amanda Langston, the beloved wife and mother, had passed, her absence left an echo in every room. The grand piano stood untouched, the rose garden untrimmed, and laughter had become rare, almost foreign. On this particular evening, Richard Langston, a man whose fortune could buy almost anything, stood before his 9-year-old daughter Lily with something money couldn't purchase: a mother's warmth. Richard had made a decision that unsettled even him. He gathered 5 wealthy women from his circle, socialites, widows, heirs of old families. Each was polished, elegant, and perfectly capable of filling the role on paper. But Richard wasn't going to choose. Tonight, it would be Lily's decision. "Sweetheart," Richard said softly, crouching to her level, "I want you to meet some very special women. One of them may become your new mother." Lily blinked, her big brown eyes wide. She was too young to fully grasp the weight of the choice, but old enough to understand what it meant to live in a house too quiet, too lonely. One by one, the women entered the sitting room, their designer heels clicking like echoes of expectation. They carried gifts, smiles that looked rehearsed, and compliments sweetened with practiced charm. Yet, Lily's small hand clutched the hem of her father's jacket tighter with each introduction. And then, when all the women had been presented, someone unexpected walked in, not wearing pearls, not draped in silk, but carrying a tray with folded linens. Her name was Grace, the housekeeper. A black woman in her late 30s, she had worked quietly in the background for years, never seeking attention, never vying for favor. She wasn't supposed to be part of this spectacle, but Lily's eyes lit up the instant she saw her. "Daddy," Lily whispered, tugging his sleeve, "if I have to choose, I choose Grace." The room fell into silence. The wealthy women's faces stiffened, their painted smiles cracking with offense. Richard's breath caught in his chest. This wasn't the plan. This wasn't even an option. Yet, in that moment, a truth trembled in the air. Sometimes the heart recognizes what money and status never could. The Langston estate stretched across acres of manicured gardens, fountains, and marble walkways. At first glance, it was a fortress of wealth. Every corridor lined with portraits of long-gone Langstons in gilded frames. But behind the grandeur was a hollow ache. The laughter that once filled these walls had been buried with Amanda Langston 3 years ago, leaving Richard and his daughter to stumble through their grief in silence. Richard, though only in his 40s, looked older than his years. His salt-and-pepper hair was always combed, his tailored suits impeccable, but his eyes carried fatigue that no amount of wealth could soften. He had been trying to raise Lily, alone, balancing board meetings with bedtime stories, stock trades with lullabies. But the truth was undeniable. He was failing. It wasn't that Lily lacked comfort. She had the best tutors, the finest toys, and more clothes than she could ever wear. But what she didn't have, what she longed for, was gentleness. Someone who could braid her hair in the morning. Someone who would kneel beside her when she was sick, not send for the family doctor. Someone who understood the quiet ache of a little girl who lost her mother too soon. That was why Richard had arranged this evening. He had convinced himself this was for Lily's sake, though deep down, part of it was for him too. He wanted companionship, warmth, maybe even love. But he told himself, and everyone else, that this was Lily's choice. The 5 women arrived in a parade of wealth and elegance. There was Claudia Beaumont, widow of a banking tycoon, draped in black silk with diamond earrings that could blind under the chandelier. She carried herself like royalty, as if merely stepping into the Langston estate added to its prestige. Next came Evelyn Marlowe, a sharp-tongued socialite whose laugh was louder than the room needed, her gown crimson and daring. She handed Lily a velvet-wrapped box containing a diamond bracelet, as if love could be purchased with carats. Victoria Holloway, the daughter of an oil magnate, entered with a bouquet of imported lilies, her perfume thick enough to claim territory before she spoke. Serena Crosswell, tall and poised, offered a porcelain doll, delicate, pristine, and, as Lily quickly noticed, cold to the touch. And lastly, Margaret Wexler, a philanthropist whose smile was polished but tired, as though her kindness had been worn down by too many public galas. Each woman curtsied, kissed Lily's cheek, or offered rehearsed words about how lucky she was. Lily nodded politely, her small hands clutching the fabric of her pale blue dress, but her heart wasn't stirring. The room, despite its glitter, felt heavier with each passing minute. Grace had not intended to be part of any of this. She had been working in the Langston household for nearly 6 years, long enough to see Amanda Z. Laughter echo down the corridors, and long enough to watch it vanish after her death. Grace was not simply staff. She had been there the night Amanda passed, had quietly stayed up afterward to comfort Lily with warm tea and soft lullabies, until she finally fell asleep. Tonight, Grace was only there to deliver folded linens to the guest rooms, stepping carefully past the polished crowd. But when Lily spotted her, everything shifted. The tray clinked as Grace paused in the doorway, unsure if she had interrupted. Her uniform was neat but simple, her natural curls tucked back with a navy scarf. She didn't radiate wealth. She radiated steadiness. "Grace!" Lily called out before her father could say anything. Every head turned. Richard felt his chest tighten. This wasn't how tonight was supposed to unfold. Grace gave a small smile, bowing her head. "Good evening, Miss Lily. Mr. Langston." "You came at the right time," Lily said with sudden boldness, her voice echoing in the tense room. "Daddy wants me to pick a new mother. I choose you." The words, though innocent, were seismic. The wealthy women stiffened. Claudia raised an eyebrow so sharply it looked as though it might slice the air. Evelyn chuckled, though it carried the sting of mockery. Serena whispered something under her breath to Victoria, who responded with a smug tilt of her chin. Richard swallowed, unsure how to respond. His plan had been disrupted by the one person who was never supposed to be considered. Grace, however, did not flinch. She set down the tray, her eyes softening as she approached Lily. Kneeling to the child's level, she whispered gently, "Oh, sweetheart, I work here. I'm not someone your father asked to—" She hesitated, glancing at Richard, "to be part of this decision." But Lily's grip on her hand tightened. "I don't want them," she said, her voice breaking in a way only a child's could, fragile, piercing. "I want you. You tuck me in when Daddy's late. You bring me hot cocoa when I'm sick. You remember Mommy's lullaby." Richard's heart cracked at the mention. He hadn't even remembered the tune Amanda used to hum at bedtime, but Grace had. The room seemed to hold its breath. For the first time in years, Richard realized the truth that had been right in front of him. His daughter didn't want another socialite, heiress, or widow. She wanted the woman who had quietly been mothering her all along. The silence in the sitting room was almost unbearable. The 5 wealthy women shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances heavy with indignation. Richard adjusted his cufflinks, his jaw tight. He was a man used to controlling rooms, commanding board meetings, and bending circumstances to his will. But this was his daughter's voice, not a contract he could rewrite. "Lily," he began carefully, his voice low, "Grace is our housekeeper. She's not—" He trailed off, searching for words that wouldn't sound cruel. "She's not one of the candidates." "But I don't care about them," Lily said, her voice trembling with conviction. "I don't want anyone else. I want her." Every syllable was a plea, but also a declaration. It wasn't petulance, it was need. The kind of need that had gone unheard for too long. Grace's dark eyes softened, but she shook her head gently. "Miss Lily, your father only wants what's best for you." "He—" "What's best for me is you!" Lily burst out, her little hands balling into fists. The room cracked open then. Evelyn's laughter bubbled out, sharp as glass. "Oh, Richard," she said, her red lips curling. "How precious." The child is confused. Choosing the help over women of standing? It's adorable, but surely you won't indulge this fantasy. Claudia's diamond earrings glittered as she tilted her head, her voice cool as ice. "It would be highly unorthodox. Surely you want a woman who can carry your family name with dignity, not tarnish it." Richard's chest burned at their words, but he stayed silent, torn between embarrassment and truth. Grace rose slowly, her hands folded in front of her apron. She wasn't angry, she rarely was, but her presence carried a quiet authority that hushed the room more than the chandelier's glow ever could. "With respect," she said calmly, "Miss Lily is not confused. She knows love when she sees it. That's something no name, no jewel, no reputation can replace." The air thickened. Margaret, the philanthropist, looked down as though something, in Grace's words, had struck her own private nerve. Richard rubbed the bridge of his nose, fighting back the storm of thoughts. This was not the showcase he envisioned. He had imagined Lily warming up to one of the women, perhaps Claudia, with her regal aura, or Serena with her poise. He had imagined a graceful acceptance, a path forward, but instead, his daughter had shattered the script, holding up a mirror he wasn't ready to face. "Grace," he said finally, his voice heavy, "this puts you in a difficult position. I don't expect you to—" "You don't have to expect it," Lily interrupted, stepping forward, her small frame surprisingly firm. She reached up, gripping Grace's hand again. "I choose her. That's it." Grace looked down at Lily, then up at Richard. Something unspoken passed between them. Years of silent service, unacknowledged sacrifice, and the invisible threads of care she had woven for this family. All of it seemed to come to the surface. Richard's throat tightened. For the first time, he wondered if perhaps his daughter was seeing more clearly than he was. The wealthy women were restless now, each finding ways to dismiss the awkwardness. Evelyn sipped her champagne too quickly. Serena whispered something about unsuitable company. Victoria checked the time on her jeweled watch. But Lily stood like a little warrior in a blue dress, her hand anchored in Grace's. And Grace, though still uncertain, did not let go. The fire in the hearth crackled, but its warmth couldn't thaw the chill spreading through the sitting room. Richard leaned back against the edge of the piano, his hand pressing against the polished wood as if bracing himself. He could feel the weight of expectation pressing on him from all sides. To the wealthy women assembled, this evening had been a pageant of sorts, a chance to prove their worthiness, to align themselves with the Langston name. To his daughter, it was something far more vulnerable, the search for love. And to Grace, it was an impossible situation, one she hadn't asked for, but couldn't easily walk away from. Claudia broke the silence first, her voice sharp but velvety. "Richard, darling, surely this misunderstanding has gone far enough. You cannot seriously be considering—" She gestured at Grace with a dismissive flick of her wrist. "Her. Think of what people would say. Think of the Langston name." Richard stiffened. He had heard those words 1,000 times in his life. The Langston name. It was the burden and blessing of his bloodline, a mantle passed from generation to generation. But in this moment, it felt more like a chain. Evelyn leaned forward, her crimson gown cascading around her like flames. "Children are impressionable," she said, her tone syrupy, but edged with steel. "They cling to those who coddle them. But parenting is about strength, guidance, pedigree. Surely you wouldn't leave such a choice to a child." At this, Lily's face flushed red. She stepped forward, still clutching Grace's hand, and snapped, "I'm not a baby. I know what I want, and I don't want you." Her little voice, trembling with both fear and defiance, cut through the smugness in the room like glass shattering on marble. Serena gasped audibly. Victoria raised her brows, amused by the child's rebellion but too polite to comment. Only Margaret looked away, her eyes glistening as though Lily's words reminded her of something long buried. Richard's head pounded. He wanted to stop the spiral, but every word seemed to dig the hole deeper. "Lily," he said firmly, "please, mind your tone." "No!" she cried, her lip quivering but her spirit unbroken. "You don't understand, Daddy? They don't care about me. They only care about you. Grace cares about me. She always has." The silence that followed was unbearable. Richard turned to Grace, who stood so still she might have been carved from stone, but her eyes betrayed her turmoil. She hadn't asked for this, hadn't schemed or angled herself into such a position. Yet here she was, standing in the center of a storm she had quietly held at bay for years. Finally, Grace spoke. Her voice was soft, but it carried more weight than any of the others. "Mr. Langston, I never sought to replace Amanda. I never thought of myself as more than what I was hired to be. But Lily is right about one thing. I love her, not as staff loves a child, but as a woman who's watched her grow, who's held her through tears, who's remembered the songs her mother used to sing." Her voice trembled then, just slightly. "If that is not enough, then I will accept it. But I will not let her believe her feelings are a mistake." Margaret's composure cracked. She dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief and murmured, "Wise words." The others, however, bristled. Evelyn scoffed, muttering, "How quaint." Claudia's lips thinned, her silence sharper than words. Victoria smirked faintly, as if she saw a scandal brewing and relished the thought of gossip. Serena crossed her arms, whispering, "Utterly unsuitable." Richard's chest tightened. His instinct was to shut it all down, to send the women home and pretend this night had never happened. But Lily's hand in Grace's kept him still. He looked at his daughter and saw Amanda's eyes, big, earnest, filled with a fire he couldn't ignore. For the first time in years, he questioned the path he had set. Had he been trying to build stability for Lily, or just to polish his reputation? The chandelier's light seemed to dim as the evening pressed on. The wealthy women grew restless, their patience fraying. Lily leaned closer to Grace, as though drawing strength from her mere presence. Richard, caught in the middle, felt the foundation of his carefully controlled life start to quake. This wasn't just about Lily's choice anymore. It was about his own heart, his own blindness, and the courage it might take to follow the truth, even if the world sneered. The Langston sitting room, once intended as a stage for elegance, had devolved into an arena of unspoken battles. The rideau chandelier's golden glow cast long shadows across the marble floor, as if the house itself bore witness to the fracture between appearances and truth. Richard remained motionless by the piano, his thoughts colliding like waves. He could hear Amanda's voice in the back of his mind, her laughter, her warmth, the way she used to ground him when society's expectations grew suffocating. He had convinced himself he was doing the right thing for Lily by arranging this showcase. But now, faced with his daughter's clarity, he wondered if he had been fooling himself. The women sensed his hesitation, and like predators in silk gowns, they pounced. "Richard," Serena began smoothly, her voice calm but laced. "With superiority, a household is not just about affection. It is about legacy. Would you really entrust the Langston legacy to—" She let her gaze flick to Grace, her meaning obvious. "Someone without the right upbringing?" Claudia's diamond earrings swayed as she added, "Your late wife came from good stock. Society knew her, respected her. To replace her with this would diminish everything she stood for." Evelyn leaned forward, her red gown catching firelight. "Besides, let's be honest, darling. Staff always blur boundaries when given too much leeway. You should have seen this coming." Richard's jaw clenched. He despised the condescension, but their words echoed the very fears gnawing inside him. Lily, however, was unshaken. She stepped forward again, planting herself in the center of the room. Her small figure, framed by the towering women in gowns, looked impossibly fragile. Yet her voice was clear. "Mommy wouldn't care about stock. Mommy would care if someone loved me." The room fell silent. Grace's breath caught. For all her composure, she felt the sting of tears pressing at her eyes. She turned slightly, trying to shield her face. This was not her place, she told herself. She had been hired to keep the household running, not to stand at the center of its heart. "Miss Lily," she whispered, kneeling again, "you are kind, but I am not your mother. I could never take her place." "But you don't have to take her place," Lily pleaded. "You already take care of me. I don't need another mommy. I just need you." The words were daggers, piercing straight through Richard's carefully constructed wall of logic. His throat closed, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. Margaret, the quietest of the 5 women, finally found her voice. "Perhaps," she said softly, her hands folded in her lap, "children see things more purely than we do. Perhaps we confuse status with love." The other women turned toward her, scandalized. But Margaret did not waver. Her tired eyes held a sadness that suggested she spoke from experience. Grace looked to Richard then, her expression conflicted. "Mr. Langston, I never wanted to stand in her shadow. Amanda was extraordinary, and I—" She stopped, her voice trembling. "I am not her." Richard's heart thudded painfully. He remembered Amanda's last words to him before her illness took her away. "Promise me you'll take care of her. Promise me you won't let her feel alone." And yet, hadn't he failed? He had let tutors, governesses, and nannies try to fill the void, but none of them stayed. None of them reached Lily's heart. Only Grace had. Quietly, steadily, without expectation. The wealthy women shifted again, sensing his silence as an Eva baby opening. Evelyn crossed one leg over the other, flashing her diamond bracelet. "Richard, you know how this will look. Society is watching. Your name, your company, your influence, it all depends on perception. Are you really willing to throw it away for sentiment?" Her words dripped poison, but they struck a nerve. Richard's company board already scrutinized his every move. Investors whispered about his grief. To give them scandal was to hand them ammunition. And yet, what was the cost of denying his daughter's truth? Grace, perhaps sensing the storm in him, began to withdraw. She slowly pulled her hand from Lily's, whispering, "Sweetheart, your father must decide." "I cannot. I should not." But Lily clung tighter, desperation cracking her little voice. "No, don't leave me too. Mommy left, and now you're leaving too." Her cry shattered Richard. He rushed forward, crouching beside his daughter, his hands trembling as he tried to soothe her. But Lily pushed into Grace's arms, sobbing into her apron. The sight nearly undid him. Grace held Lily instinctively, rocking her gently, whispering words Richard couldn't hear. And for the first time, Richard realized he was watching the very thing he thought he could buy. Family. Not wealth. Not titles. Not good stock. Family. He rose slowly, his eyes sweeping across the 5 women who sat stiffly in their gowns, their jeweled masks cracking. Then he looked at Grace, at Lily clutched tightly against her chest, and at the raw, unpolished truth of it all. And he knew the night was far from over. The hour grew late, and the grand sitting room seemed to suffocate under its own grandeur. The chandelier above, once dazzling, now flickered faintly, as if it too grew weary of the charade. Outside, the fee, tall windows, the garden lamps glowed dimly, casting long shadows across the manicured hedges. Inside, tension simmered like water ready to boil over. Grace still held Lily close, rocking her gently as the child's sobs softened into hiccups. Richard stood nearby, helpless, his polished composure crumbling bit by bit. His heart was raw, torn between his world of wealth and his daughter's unflinching truth. Claudia rose first, smoothing her silk gown with deliberate grace. "Richard," she said, her voice dripping with restrained disdain, "you cannot indulge this. A child's grief is understandable, but it is not a compass for the future of the Langston estate. If you let her dictate this circus, you'll be the subject of ridicule in every drawing room from here to New York." Evelyn followed, her laugh brittle. "Imagine the headlines. Millionaire weds maid, calls it love. You'll lose the board's respect, your friends, your reputation. Surely you're not that foolish." Victoria chimed in with a sly smile. "And let's not forget, when money is involved, so are motives. How can you ever be sure," she said, tilting her head toward Grace, "that she isn't simply playing the long game?" Grace flinched, as if struck. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but Lily beat her to it. "She's not like you," Lily cried, stepping forward again, her small fists clenched. "She doesn't want Daddy's money. She wants me. You don't even see me. None of you do." Her voice cracked into a sob, but her words landed like stones. Margaret inhaled sharply, her face pale. Richard's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, to cut through the cruelty, but doubt still clawed at him. The women weren't wrong. His world would explode if he chose Grace. Shareholders would question his judgment. Society would sneer. Old friends would turn their backs. And yet, what kind of father would he be if he ignored Lily's voice? Grace, still shaken by Victoria's insinuation, lowered her gaze. Her voice was steady, but faint. "Mr. Langston, I think it would be best if I left. I never wanted to cause disruption. Miss Lily deserves stability, and if my presence complicates that, then perhaps it's kinder if I step away." Lily froze. Her eyes went wide, and then, like glass shattering, she screamed, "No, you can't leave me! Not you too!" She threw herself against Grace, clinging so tightly it hurt. Her sobs echoed off the marble, filling the cold room with a sound that no chandelier could drown out. Richard's heart nearly gave out at the sight. His little girl, broken and begging, clinging to the only person who made her feel whole. The wealthy women shifted, some with discomfort, some with thinly veiled impatience. Claudia muttered something about spoiled dramatics. Evelyn rolled her eyes. Serena crossed her arms. But Margaret wept silently, unable to contain herself. Grace's arms tightened around Lily. She whispered, "Sweetheart, don't cry. I'm here. I promise. I'm here." But Lily looked up at her father, her face streaked with tears, her voice raw with desperation. "Daddy, you always tell me I can trust you, that you'll keep me safe. If you make Grace go, then you lied." The words cut deeper than any accusation from the boardroom ever could. Richard staggered back as if struck, his polished mask shattering. He saw his daughter not as the heiress of the Langston estate, but as a little girl begging for the only kind of love he hadn't been able to provide. The wealthy women watched him closely, their jeweled eyes gleaming with expectation. They wanted him to reject this madness, to restore the order of things, to send Grace back to her station. But Richard's heart thundered with a truth he could no longer deny. His daughter had already chosen her mother. He turned his gaze toward Grace. Her face was wet with tears, her arms still wrapped around Lily like a shield. She looked up at him, conflicted, frightened, but unyielding in her quiet strength. It was then Richard realized Amanda's last gift was not just Lily. It was also the wisdom to recognize love when it appeared in its humblest form. The room seemed to hold its breath, as though the very walls waited for him to speak. And Richard knew, with absolute certainty, that the moment of decision was near. The silence in the Langston sitting room was unbearable. Even the fire in the EIB hearth had dimmed to embers, as if it too awaited Richard's decision. Lily clung to Grace with every ounce of strength in her tiny body, her tear-streaked cheeks pressed against the familiar fabric of Grace's apron. Her small sobs echoed through the marble hall, cutting deeper into Richard's chest than any business betrayal or financial loss ever could. Richard looked at the 5 women before him: Claudia, Evelyn, Serena, Victoria, and Margaret. They sat like judges in a court, each draped in jewels and expectation. Their eyes demanded conformity, demanded he protect the Langston name. But then he looked at his daughter, trembling and vulnerable, and at Grace, whose arms encircled Lily like an anchor in the storm. For the first time in his life, Richard realized he had to choose not as a Langston, not as a millionaire, not as the man society expected him to be, but as a father. He drew a long breath. His voice came out low, but steady. "Enough." The word hung heavy in the air. The wealthy women stilled. Claudia arched an eyebrow. Evelyn leaned forward, ready for the drama she craved. Serena's lips parted in shock. Victoria smirked faintly, hungry for scandal. Margaret, tears streaking her cheeks, bowed her head in silence. Richard stepped away from the piano and toward his daughter. Each step echoed sharply across the marble, like a gavel striking. "Lily," he said softly, kneeling before her, "look at me." She lifted her tearful eyes. "Don't make her go, Daddy. Please." Richard's throat tightened. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her damp cheek. "I won't," he whispered. "I promise you, I won't." Lily gasped, her tiny hands clutching his face. Relief flooded her features like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. She turned to Grace, burying her face in her chest with a muffled cry of joy. The room erupted. Claudia's voice cut through the air like ice. "Richard, this is madness. You cannot possibly mean to." "I do," Richard said, rising to his full height. His voice carried the authority of boardrooms and courtrooms, but now it was fueled by something stronger. Love. "My daughter has chosen, and she has chosen well." Evelyn laughed sharply, though the sound was brittle. "Well, Richard, do you have any idea what this will do to your reputation, to your company, to your standing in society?" Richard's jaw hardened. "If my reputation cannot withstand the truth of my daughter's heart, then it isn't worth having." Serena scoffed, stepping forward. "You'll regret this. You'll regret it when doors close, when investors flee, when society turns its back on you." But Richard's eyes, steady now, no longer wavered. "Society has never tucked my daughter in at night. Society has never held her when she cried. Society has never remembered her mother's lullabies. Grace has." The words stunned the room. For the first time, the wealthy women faltered. Their polished veneers cracked. Margaret stood slowly, her voice trembling but sincere. "Then, she is the only right choice." Her eyes met Grace's, and she nodded with something like gratitude, before turning to leave. Claudia, Evelyn, Serena, and Victoria, however, were not so gracious. They rose in a storm of silk and jewels, their scorn sharp. Claudia hissed, "You'll ruin yourself, Richard." Evelyn sneered, "You'll regret this spectacle." Serena muttered, "Unfit." Victoria smirked, "Scandal sells. I'll enjoy watching the fallout." One by one, they swept from the room, their perfume lingering like bitterness in the air. When the heavy doors shut behind them, silence returned. This time softer, gentler, almost reverent. Grace stood frozen, still holding Lily, her eyes wide, with disbelief. "Mr. Langston," she began, her voice trembling, "why would you risk everything for me?" Richard turned to her, and for the first time in years, his expression softened completely. "Because Lily is right. You've been here all along, loving her, caring for her, filling a space I couldn't, and I was too blind to see it until tonight." Grace's lips trembled. "I am not Amanda. I can never be her." "No," Richard said firmly, stepping closer, his voice steady. "You're not meant to replace her. You're Grace, and what you are is enough. More than enough." Lily lifted her head from Grace's chest, her little face glowing through the remnants of tears. "Does that mean she can stay forever?" Richard knelt again, looking his daughter in the eyes. "Yes, sweetheart. She's not going anywhere." Grace's eyes filled with tears she had fought for years to contain. She looked down at Lily, then at Richard. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe it might be true. The three of them stood in the golden light of the chandelier, no longer fractured, but bound together by something stronger than wealth or expectation. Love. The days that followed felt like the breaking of a storm. Whispers raced through the marble halls of Langston Manor before slipping out into the polished streets of Charleston. Servants carried rumors like sparks in dry grass, and by the week's end, every parlor and country club in the city hummed with scandal. Richard Langston has chosen his housekeeper. He's ruined himself. A Langston marrying a servant. A black woman at that. The words stung with venom, but Richard held his head high. For years he had walked into boardrooms with the weight of empire on his shoulders. Now, for the first time, he walked with a different kind of weight. The burden of love that demanded courage. Grace felt the sting too. She had lived her whole life in the shadows, careful, unnoticed, moving quietly so as not to disturb the world that never truly saw her. Now, suddenly, she was the center of its gaze. Women whispered when she entered a shop. Men raised brows. Some laughed. Some looked away. But when she came home, Lily would rush into her arms, her little voice, chirping, "Mama Grace," and all the whispers of the world seemed to fade. For Lily, there was no scandal, only joy. She walked lighter, laughed more freely, sang again at the piano with Grace's warm voice joining hers. She slept without nightmares. The house that had once echoed with emptiness now pulsed with the simple rhythm of a family rediscovered. Richard, too, began to change. He still wore his tailored suits, still arrived punctually at his offices, but something in him softened. He spent evenings in the nursery, letting Lily braid his hair with clumsy fingers. He allowed Grace to tease him gently when he burned toast in the kitchen. He began to listen, not only to business deals, but to hearts. And yet, the outside world pressed in. At the country club, Richard was met with thin smiles and sharpened whispers. Old friends avoided his gaze. A few investors quietly pulled out of ventures. But there were others, those who admired his defiance, those who found courage in his stand. A few men slapped his back with genuine pride. "Took guts, Langston. Not sure I'd have the strength." The board of directors raised questions, murmuring about reputation and public image. But Richard silenced them with the same steel that had built his empire. "My private life," he said evenly, "is not a matter for corporate strategy. If you have concerns about profit margins, I'll listen. If you have concerns about love, keep them to yourself." Behind him, Grace quietly picked up the shattered pieces of her dignity and learned to set them into something stronger. She dressed with simple elegance now, still modest, but with a quiet pride. She stood beside Richard, in public. Not as his servant, not yet as his wife, but as something undeniable. There were nights, though, when doubt crept in. Grace would sit awake long after Lily and Richard had gone to bed, staring out at the gardens bathed in moonlight. "Do I belong here?" she wondered. "Am I enough for them?" One night, Richard found her there. He joined her by the window, silent at first. Then, gently, he took her hand. "You're worried," he said. Grace nodded, eyes brimming. "I'm not her. I can never be Amanda." Richard squeezed her hand. "Amanda is gone. I will always love her memory. But Lily needs the woman who's here now, and so do I." Grace turned to him, her heart trembling. His eyes, often so fierce, held only honesty. Slowly, she leaned against his shoulder, letting herself rest there. In that moment, the last walls she had built around her heart began to crumble. Months passed. The whispers in town did not vanish, but they softened. Some grew tired of the scandal. Others grudgingly respected Richard's defiance. Still others found themselves disarmed by Grace's quiet grace, her patience, her kindness, the way she never lashed back, only stood firm. And in the Langston household, life found a rhythm. Grace braided Lily's hair for school, humming old hymns as Lily giggled. Richard joined them at the breakfast table, sipping coffee as he listened to his daughter chatter about her lessons. At night, Lily insisted they all read together, nestled in a pile of blankets in her room. One Sunday morning, as church bells rang across the city, Richard stood before the congregation with Grace at his side. Murmurs rippled through the pews, but Richard's voice did not waver. "This is Grace," he said simply, his arms steady around her. "She has given my daughter back her laughter. She has given me back my heart, and I will not hide it." Some gasped, some frowned, but a few, just a few, smiled. And Lily, swinging her legs against the pew, beamed. For her, the world was simple. She had a father who listened and a mother who stayed. That night, after Lily fell asleep, Richard found Grace in the sitting room. He knelt before her, not with the grandeur of a millionaire, but with the humility of a man. "Grace," he whispered, his voice raw, "I cannot promise you an easy life, but I can promise you love. Will you marry me?" Grace's hands trembled as tears spilled down her cheeks. For years, she had been invisible. Now, she was seen. Truly seen. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes." When Lily awoke the next morning to find them in the kitchen, laughing together, she squealed with joy and leapt into Grace's arms. "Does this mean you're really my mama now?" Grace kissed her forehead. "Yes, my love, forever." And for the first time in years, the Langston mansion was filled not with silence, not with whispers of what was lost, but with the sound of a family found again.